Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so we are now into the chapter on the path to liberation. And last time I discussed two suttas which we could consider preambles or introductions to the path to liberation. And then we consider the third passage, which, this is on page 238, which declares that the goal of the Buddha's teaching can be explained as the fading away of lust, the abandoning of the fetters of the mind, the uprooting of the underlying tendencies, the destruction of the asavas, these are the root defilements, or I call them the primordial defilements, the realization of true knowledge and liberation, or the sake of knowledge and vision, and final nibbana without clinging. So these are, in different ways, expressions of the final goal of the Buddha's teaching. And then for each of these goals, the Buddha points out that there is a path that leads to this goal. And this path is the Noble Eightfold Path. And so in today's class, we'll be discussing and explaining the Noble Eightfold Path. But one feature, before I actually come to the analysis of the path, which is in section 2 of this chapter, I just want to jump ahead to section 3. This is on page 240 to 241. Because what this section indicates is that the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. Just please come and take any seats that are available. Okay, what this passage indicates is that the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path is not a solitary practice. Of course, certain aspects of the practice have to be developed in seclusion, in solitude, but the path is not something that one just practices as a kind of isolated enterprise. It's not just another instance of private enterprise. But the Buddha indicates in this passage that the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path is undertaken in communion with others. And so if we turn to this text itself, we see that on one occasion the Buddha's attendant, personal attendant, Venerable Ananda, comes to the Buddha and says that when he was reflecting one day on his own, he came to the conclusion that half of the spiritual life is good friendship. The Pali expression for this is kalyana mittata. Okay, this word kalyana mittata is based on the primary constituent is the word kalyana mita, which means a good friend. Not a good friend in the American sense of a close friend, but rather a friend who is a good person, a friend who guides one along the good way, or a friend who accompanies one along the good way. Okay, so Venerable Ananda's understanding, according to the explanation given in the commentary, is that half of the practice is what one does on one's own in seclusion, and then because one depends upon a good friend to help one in the practice, therefore he thinks half of the spiritual life is good friendship. But the Buddha then corrects him, even very forcefully. He says, Mahe Vangananda, Mahe Vangananda, which means, literally it means not so, but that Ma is a more forceful negation. So it's a very, very forceful way of stopping Ananda. And then the Buddha says, this is the entire spiritual life. That is good friendship, good companionship, good... In English I found it difficult to think of 3 words, normal words that mean a friend. You don't want to say good palship, it sounds too crude. So we have friend, companion. And then for the 3rd word I had to resort to the old Russian communist expression, comrade. Okay, so good friendship, good companionship, good... I'm sorry. President Eisenhower, President Kennedy, all you did is against communism. We have to resort to good comradeship. Okay, so then the Buddha explains why is this so? When a monk has a good friend, a good companion, a good Buddhist comrade, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path. And so in the Buddha's understanding, a good friend serves in many capacities in relation to development of the Noble Eightfold Path. You could say it's a good friend, could be considered... In fact, I distinguish 2 or even 3 aspects of being a good friend. One is the senses that the word good friend has in the Buddhist text. One is, good friend is used to designate a teacher. And so I call this vertical good friendship, in that there's a kind of hierarchical relationship. The good friend is the superior person that one relies on for instruction, for guidance, encouragement. And so later in the Theravada tradition, the word good friend, this is in the period of the commentaries, comes to be used almost to designate the meditation teacher that one relies on. But in the early text, Kalyana Mita, good friend, one sense is that of the teacher, the one who provides the guidance and instruction. But the second aspect of good friendship is good friendship amongst those who are practicing together. This is what I call horizontal good friendship. That is, good friends who are roughly on the same level of practice. And then within this horizontal good friendship, again I would distinguish two secondary levels, with two secondary aspects. One is good friendship amongst those who are simply practicing together, roughly at the same level. And the other is a good friendship between those who might be a little bit more advanced than oneself, but are not in the position of a teacher. So these would be good friends who give helpful advice, points of instruction, who might give encouragement, give inspiration by their example, but they're not yet so developed that they're in the position of a teacher relative to oneself. But they're more advanced than those friends who are simply following the path along with oneself. Okay, so the Buddha continues here. He says, how, Ananda, does a monk with a good friend, a good companion, a good comrade, develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path? Then the Buddha explains here, a monk develops right view, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing and release. All of these terms indicate that this is the right view and the other path factors which are leading to the ultimate goal of Nibbana. He develops right intention, etc., through to right concentration, based on seclusion, dispassion, cessation, maturing in release. And in this way, Ananda, that a monk with a good friend, a good companion, a good comrade, develops and cultivates the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so in this paragraph, the good friend could be considered to be either a teacher, that's the superior good friend, or the good friend that is cultivating the path along with oneself, but giving oneself help, inspiration, and encouragement. But then in the next paragraph, the Buddha is going to indicate that he himself is the supreme example of the good friend. So he says, by the following method or in the following way too, Ananda, it may be understood how the entire spiritual life is good friendship, good companionship, good comradeship. And then he says, by relying upon me as a good friend. So here the Buddha is pointing to himself as the supreme good friend in the role of the teacher. Being subject to birth, are freed from birth. Those subject to aging, to death, are freed from aging and death. Those subject to sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and despair are freed from sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and despair. And so it's in this way, the Buddha says, that it can be understood how the entire spiritual life is good friendship. So you could say that the significance of this is that the Buddha is the one who has discovered the way to release from birth, aging, sickness, and death, and so on. And then the Buddha, having accomplished this for himself, then, out of his sense of good friendship, he takes on the role of the teacher for humanity. Sometimes he's called the good physician, the good medical doctor for humanity. But here it's the position of the good friend for humanity, because out of compassion, he has taught the way that leads to freedom from birth, aging, sickness, and death. Okay, so this passage illustrates the role of good friendship in the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. And now we can go back to section number 2. This is on page 239. and then go through the Noble Eightfold Path itself. Okay, it's obvious the Noble Eightfold Path is divided, or it's constituted by 8 factors. And these 8 factors function together, we could say, organically, in that we have the 8 factors constitute a kind of process by which one factor arises on the basis of the previous factor. The Buddha says in the sutta, he says that it's from right view that right intentions arises. On the basis of right intention that right speech arises. Based on right speech, right action arises. And so on through right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. However, I'll say now that I don't think that statement should be understood too literally, but it has to be understood with certain qualifications, which I'll explain. But one idea that we should avoid is the idea that the Noble Eightfold Path is a series of steps in which one fulfills one factor as the first step, then one leaves it behind to fulfill the next factor as the second step, then goes on to the third, fourth, fifth. They're not a series of steps, but you can say that they're a sequence of factors, and as each succeeding factor arises, it builds on the preceding factor, but it also functions alongside the preceding factor. So when the Noble Eightfold Path reaches its high point or peak of development, then all 8 factors are present together simultaneously. Now, very often when one reads basic textbooks on Buddhism, especially Theravada Buddhism, one finds the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path divided into 3 groups. The first 2 factors, it's said, form the wisdom group. The next 3 factors, right speech, right livelihood, right effort, form the morality or right conduct group. And then the next 3 factors, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, form the concentration group. Has anybody come across this way of explaining the Noble Eightfold Path before? If you have, just raise your hand. Almost everybody. And so, as I said, almost any basic textbook on Buddhism, basic Buddhism, will analyze the Noble Eightfold Path in this way, including the little book that I wrote called The Noble Eightfold Path. But I then realized later that there is only one place in the entire Sutta Pitaka in which the Noble Eightfold Path is analyzed in that way. And that passage isn't spoken by the Buddha. It's spoken by a nun named Dhammadina. So the Buddha later approves of her statement. But my personal suspicion is that the sutta is a little bit later than the other parts of the Sutta Pitaka. That it doesn't really stem from the oldest period. But this has become sort of standard Theravada Buddhist doctrine. Right view, right intention, the wisdom group, right speech, right action, right livelihood, the sila or moral discipline group, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, the concentration group. Then one comes across a problem that when the three groups are presented in the suttas again and again, it's always moral discipline first, followed by concentration, followed by wisdom. So why do the factors of the wisdom group come first? So then it becomes something of a problem for expounders of the Dhamma to clarify. Okay, my understanding is that the Buddha laid down these factors of the Noble Eightfold Path in a particular sequence because he wanted the path to be developed in this sequence. And so the Buddha begins with right view for the reason that in order to be properly cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path as the Noble Eightfold Path, as the way to liberation, it has to begin with right view, and all the other factors have to be developed on the basis of right view. And now, one point that I should clarify, this is from my own understanding, is that, again, when people ask, what is basic Buddhism in practice, then often one will say, it's the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, now it's true that the Buddha taught the Noble Eightfold Path generally to humanity. It's not exclusively a monastic path, but he taught it to monks, nuns, householders, Brahmins, inquirers, anybody who wanted to know the way to the extinction of suffering. But the basic Buddhist practices are things like the 5 precepts, qualities like the 4 Brahmavihara attitudes, loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, equanimity. But the Noble Eightfold Path is the Buddha's distinctive way to liberation from suffering. It is the way to the final goal of the teaching, the highest goal. So for the goals of happiness within this present life, for the goal of achieving a happy rebirth in future life, the Buddha taught more basic teachings, like the 5 precepts, the 10 courses of wholesome action, the attitudes of the 4 Brahmaviharas or divine abodes. But the Noble Eightfold Path is the path to liberation. And because liberation depends upon wisdom, it begins with right view. The fundamental cause of human bondage and suffering, according to the Buddha, is ignorance. And ignorance, again, is the factor that keeps us trapped within samsara, within the round of birth and death. And so what is ultimately needed to break out of samsara is wisdom. And wisdom is what comes at the end of the Noble Eightfold Path. But the seed of wisdom is right view. So right view, the Buddha calls it Pubhangama, which means the forerunner of the Noble Eightfold Path. And there's a sutta where the Buddha develops a simile comparing the Noble Eightfold Path to a chariot. And he calls right view the thoroughbred horses that draw the chariot. So, just as the horses run in front of the chariot and pull the chariot, So right view is what comes at the beginning of the Noble Eightfold Path and pulls the Eightfold Path. And the reason why the Buddha places right view there is because right view is, as I said, it's the seed of wisdom. You say it's the first spark of wisdom. It's not yet the panya. It's not yet the wisdom that develops through the cultivation of the Noble Eightfold Path. But in its initial manifestation, it's an understanding that will guide the rest of the Noble Eightfold Path. Sometimes we distinguish wisdom into three categories. We distinguish three types of wisdom. The first is called wisdom born of learning, or literally it's born of hearing or listening. Because in the Buddha's day, in order to learn the Dhamma, one doesn't have printed books to rely on. One doesn't have websites on the internet to rely on. No CDs, DVDs, tapes. But in order to learn the Dhamma, one has to go to the presence of a teacher and listen to live discourses on the Dhamma. Or one goes to a teacher and asks questions to clarify one's understanding. Okay, so initially one acquires this wisdom born of learning. This is not yet the higher penetrative wisdom, but it's some degree of understanding that comes from listening to others. Then based on this wisdom born of learning, then one reflects on what one hears. One examines the meaning of it, considers its different implications, the way it applies to one's own life. And then this gives rise to wisdom born of reflection, wisdom born of deep consideration. At that point, one starts to develop the other factors of the path, and then eventually, when these gain momentum, they constitute what we call cultivation, meditative development. And then based on this cultivation or meditative development, there rises the wisdom born of cultivation. That is the higher penetrative wisdom or penetrative insight. Okay, the right view that comes at the beginning of the Noble Eightfold Path, we can understand to be the wisdom born of learning, wisdom born of reflection. As one continues to develop the Noble Eightfold Path, then this right view, born of learning, born of reflection, will become transformed into the right view of insight, or penetrative right view. And at that point it will constitute the wisdom born of cultivation. Then it becomes the higher right view. Okay, but at the outset of the practice, one needs the right view that's acquired through listening, hearing, or we could also say through study of the Dhamma. And then the Buddha next explains the content of this right view. And he explains that this is knowledge of suffering, knowledge of the origin of suffering, knowledge of the cessation of suffering, knowledge of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Okay, this is what I call the world transcending right view. This is the right view that leads to ultimate liberation. And it is, as we can see, it is knowledge or understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And to constitute knowledge or understanding of the Four Noble Truths, it shouldn't just be purely intellectual understanding, the way a college student might read a book on Buddhism and get some intellectual understanding of the Four Noble Truths. But we have to realize that what is called knowledge here, jnana, is synonymous with the word view here, which means some it's a personal understanding, even if it's at the level still of opinion, not yet the level of experiential realization. But it's still an opinion which involves some degree of personal insight into the meaning and implications of the Four Noble Truths. We've already come across the expression right view in earlier chapters in the context of the 10 ways of wholesome action. The Buddha explains that the 10th factor is right view. But the right view there is different from this right view. The right view, which is a course of wholesome action, is the right view which accepts, which understands the validity of karmic causation. The right view which understands, which accepts the reality of the process of rebirth, which understands how unwholesome karma leads to unfortunate states of rebirth, how wholesome karma leads to fortunate or superior states of rebirth. Yes, please take any seats available. Okay, so somebody can well have right view in that sense. Right view of karmic causation, right view of one's responsibility for one's own karma, the right view that one will receive the results of one's karma through rebirth in one or another realm of existence. But still, one might not have the right view of the Noble Eightfold Path. The right view of the Noble Eightfold Path, the right view about karmic causation is not particularly unique or special to the Buddha's teaching. We could say the right view of karma causation, in general terms, is part of the shared or common Indian worldview, going back generations, even centuries before, maybe centuries before the arising of the Buddha. But the right view of the Noble Eightfold Path, this is something which is quite special, even unique to the Buddha's teaching, because this is the right view that leads to liberation. Okay, now based on right view, there arises right intention. Sometimes this is translated right thought or right thinking, but it is not just thinking in general, but it's a particular aspect of thinking. I call this the motivational or purposive action of thinking. So that's why the translation is right intention is better than right thought. And the Buddha enumerates the constituents of right intention to be Here it's translated intention of renunciation, intention of non-ill will, intention of harmlessness. Since putting this book together, I've actually come to understand the first factor to be the result of a corruption that has taken place within ancient Buddhist tradition. This is how the corruption comes about. Any of you who have studied Pali might be able to recognize this. See, this corruption came about because of the similarity of two words in Pali. Actually, they come out to be identical, but with different derivations. Yeah, if you put the camera on screen. Could everybody see these words back there? But I'm going to go through and explain them. Okay, we start the word kama, which means sense desire. Okay, then the opposite of this is nikama, which means absence of sense desire, removal of sense desire. And then from this, one would get an abstract noun, nekama, which means absence of sense desire. Nikama means without sense desire. Nekama is absence of sense desire, being without sense desire. And in Sanskrit, this would come out to naishkamya. Okay, there is another word, a verb, kamati in Pali, but in Sanskrit this would be kramati, which means to step or to walk. Okay, nikamati means to step out, and then it takes on the meaning of to renounce. And then this gives a noun, nekama, which is identical with the word meaning absence of desire, but nekama has the meaning of renunciation. And so the commentators then went on to explain nekama in the context of the Noble Eightfold Path to mean the intention of renunciation. But in Sanskrit, nekama would be naishkramya, which is different from the Sanskrit meaning desirelessness, absence of desire. And so these two words, nekama meaning absence of desire, and nekama meaning renunciation, have the same form, the same appearance, but different derivations. So I think the original derivation would have been from nekama meaning absence of sense desire, and then this became confused with nekama meaning renunciation. Maybe because the early Buddhist texts were preserved amongst monks who had renounced the world, and so they gave a certain preference to renunciation. But the reason why I think the other derivation from desirelessness is more correct is because often we see the intention of renunciation, the nekama vitak sankappa, translated intention of renunciation, contrasted with kama sankappa. This is the intention or thought of sensual desire. And so since nekama sankappa, intention of nekama, is contrasted with the intention of sensual desire, this seems to imply that the actual meaning of nekama sankappa is the intention of desirelessness, being without sensual desire. Okay, then the second, the intention of non-ill will. This is a kind of negative way of expressing, we call this the intention of loving kindness. And then the intention of harmlessness, again it's a negative way of expressing what would be positively called the intention of compassion, or intentions based on compassion. And so within right intention, we can actually distinguish two aspects, two sides. We have the intention of removing one's greed or craving, the craving for sensual pleasures. That is expressed as the intention of desirelessness, or intention of non-sensuality. And then the other two aspects of right intention are opposed to the unwholesome root of hatred or aversion. So hatred or aversion can express itself either directly as ill will, animosity, or else it can express itself in a kind of more active form as the intention of inflicting harm on others. But when one has compassion for others, then one will give up that intention of harming and instead have the intention of benefiting others, of helping others. Okay, there seems to me to be an organic way in which right view and right intention are related. Under right view, we have the understanding of suffering and the understanding of the origin of suffering. And understanding the origin of suffering is to understand how suffering originates from craving. This is the way the Buddha explains the second noble truth. Okay, when one applies this relationship to oneself, then one sees that it is one's own craving that leads to one's own suffering. And so as one applies this relationship between craving and suffering to oneself, one sees that to overcome suffering, it's necessary to remove one's own craving. And so the understanding of that relationship, craving as the cause for suffering, brings about the intention or purpose of removing craving. And then craving, a synonym for craving, is desire in the sense of kama, selfish desire. And so understanding the Four Noble Truths in relation to oneself brings the first right intention. Intention of, here it's translated renunciation, or we could also say intention of desirelessness, the intention of removing craving. Okay, when we then go back and apply the Four Noble Truths to other living beings, then we see how they are entangled in suffering through their own craving. And then considering or reflecting on the suffering of others will generate within oneself let me put it this way. When one reflects on the suffering of others deeply, with sensitivity, this will bring about the removal within oneself of ill will and the urge to harm others. And instead it will give rise to the wish for the benefit and happiness of others, for the welfare of others. So in this way, reflection on the Four Noble Truths in relation to other living beings will generate the intention of non-ill will, or in other words, the intention of loving kindness, and the intention of harmlessness, or the intention of compassion. Maybe at this point, just if there's anything that anybody would like to have clarified, I'll just pause to invite questions. But they should be questions that relate directly to what I said, not questions which go on to other things. We could take that after we go through the entire Eightfold Path. Yes?
I'm just wondering, practically speaking, what is the significance of the distinction that you've drawn now between giving up sensual desire and renunciation? My interpretation of renunciation before had been basically to give up sensual desire.
Okay, this is a good question. The question is, what is the relationship between this intention of giving up desire, the intention of desirelessness, and the intention of renunciation? I think the problem is that this particular word nekama within the Buddhist framework of understanding signifies, or it comes to signify, the act of leaving the household life to become a monk. In fact, this is the word, no, it's not the same word translated chuja. So I think when one understands the intention, this first right intention, as desirelessness, then, and one understands the original derivation, one sees that it doesn't explicitly require giving up the household life to become a monk. Yes?
So the actual, like the penetration of the Four Noble Truths, of making it your own experience, in other words, you're viewing the reality within yourself as far as your own suffering. Seeing the arising of your own suffering, seeing the root, seeing, following the steps. So by penetrating reality through the scope of the Four Noble Truths is how the wisdom gradually starts to,
to develop,
cultivate.
Right?
And the other question I had was...
but let me just clarify that point. Reflectively examining the Four Noble Truths in relation to one's own experience, we can say this is the way wisdom starts to develop. But the wisdom which is actually born of cultivation doesn't doesn't develop just on the basis of examination and reflection. But that wisdom generally has to develop on the basis of the meditative practice.
Because I know in my own experience, the cultivation of mindfulness through meditation is like so crucial to even, starting to understand, right view, the sharpness that you accumulate through the concentration and through your own practice. So it almost seems like that also has to go hand in hand in the beginning, for me.
I'm just dealing with different aspects of the right view. But as for the right view to become deeper, sharper, more comprehensive, then it has to be based upon cultivation. And I said before that these 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, they shouldn't be understood as steps that one passes through in order to go on to the next steps. But one takes each factor along as one moves on to the next factor until the factors are working together. And so when one comes into the development, especially of right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, then the right view that is present there, that's guiding and accompanying those practices, then becomes brighter and deeper and sharper. till it becomes, we call, penetrative right view.
It almost seems like it's simultaneous from my experience, that understanding right view and the cultivation of meditation, you start to get the skill of how to meditate, and
Yeah.
so it's like almost...
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely so, yeah.
And then I was thinking, in the classic view, you were saying they start with, the Buddha started with right view, but
Yeah.
you're saying a lot of other people start with Shila. That's what you were saying, that certainly.
So what I said is that the classical textbooks of Buddhism, or the common textbooks, almost any basic book on basic Buddhism, will enumerate the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. Then they'll divide them into these three groups, and then the first two factors are put in the wisdom group. The next three factors are put in the sila group. The last three factors are put in the samadhi or concentration group. So then one gets the problem that in other texts, many other texts, the Buddha explains that the three stages of practice develop from sila, this morality, moral discipline, then to concentration, then to wisdom. So if that's the case, then how is it that in the Noble Eightfold Path, right view and right intention, which in that scheme belong to the wisdom group, how is it that they come first? And so they do constitute a kind of wisdom, but this is not the wisdom that develops on the basis of samadhi, but this is the wisdom, preliminary or preparatory wisdom, in the sense of understanding the Four Noble Truths based on learning and based on reflection. Okay.
Is there, do you see a need for an antidote to overzealous right intention? Last year you may have seen it on the Buddhist channel, the debate about communities releasing non-native turtles into New York waterways as an effort to free a practice, I'm not sure if I understand it, but basically it has a Buddhist origination to free relations, and it was pointed out many times that this is ethically environment. It's not fair to the turtle, it's not fair to native hosts, and yet a zealous good intention response is always afforded. Our intentions are very big here. So what is the antidote to?
I think it's not enough. The saying that the road to hell is paved with good intention. Okay, that's maybe a little bit too strong for this case. But it's also important to have not only right intentions, but to understand the consequences of one's actions. And if one understands the if one properly understands the consequences of one's actions, then one will modify one's intentions to avoid what seems to be good, but is actually harmful. If, in spite of one's knowledge, say, of the consequences, one persists in these types of actions because, they're traditionally encouraged, then what I would say is that one is becoming a victim of blind or superstitious practices. So it's no longer a right intention, but it's what we call sila bhatta paramasa, which means clinging to rules and traditional observances in the belief that they're wholesome or beneficial. Okay.
Could you say also, is it possible that the Noble Eightfold Path is related to the links of dependent origination in such a way that the three factors of what we call sila are really more like acts or actions, physical. And it seems like without right intentions, you can't engage in right acts. So right, in a way, right intention can cause right actions, but without the right intentions, you need right view in order to cause the right intention. So it seems it's a way of replacing, it seems just related to dependent origination in a good way, so to speak.
Yeah, we could say that these factors of the Noble Eightfold Path are related to each other in a relationship of dependent origination, in that one arises on the basis of the other. But I haven't actually seen them within the suttas put in opposition to dependent origination, except in the sense that the Noble Eightfold Path is said to be the way to the cessation of ignorance, the cessation of each of the 12 links in dependent origination. Anyway, that question is going a little bit, outside the scope. I just wanted to have questions intended to clear up the meaning of anything that I said that was not sufficiently clear. Okay, this will be the last question, then I have to move on.
From a practice point of view, I'm trying to understand how to work with afflictive emotions that do cause evil to happen. And
Say that again, I didn't quite understand.
from a practice point of view,
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand how to work with afflictive emotions that do come up. In one of your books, I read thought substitution.
Yeah, that's
And-
okay, let me just cut short. This question is not
It is related because it's about
very indirectly. Please don't feel hurt by that, because perhaps what we will say later will... Yeah.
I can come up to you later.
Excuse me? Excuse me?
I can come up to you later too.
Yeah. Okay, so let us go on. Okay, now, from right intentions, we move to right speech. The way the sutta expresses, it says, dependent upon right intention, there arises right speech. Dependent on right speech, there arises right action. Dependent upon right action, there arises right livelihood. This is one of the statements that comes in the suttas that I say should not be understood literally, in the sense that right speech, right action, right livelihood go together as a triad. It's not that one arises based on the other, but all three go together, and all three, in my understanding, arise based upon right intention. And now, another point we should understand is that right speech, right action, the factors that make up right speech, right action, right livelihood, do not actually require right view of the Noble Eightfold Path. Somebody who has no understanding of Buddhism, never heard of Buddhism, never heard of right view, but just on their own, either ethical teachings from another religion or on their own personal conscience, can be observing the principles of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. However, for there to be right speech, right action, and right livelihood as factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, there must be right view in the preliminary role. That is, it's right view that takes these factors, which can be observed naturally by somebody of a strong ethical disposition, strong natural ethical disposition. Right view which takes these three factors and then integrates them into the Noble Eightfold Path, so that they become factors of practice, factors of an integrated path leading to liberation. And so we have under right speech, abstaining from false speech or lying, abstaining from malicious speech, that speech intended to divide those who are on friendly terms, abstinence from harsh speech, abstinence from idle chatter or gossip. Then right action, we have abstaining from the destruction of life, abstaining from taking what is not given, abstaining from sexual misconduct. This is right action. Sometimes people ask, in the 5 precepts, one has abstaining from the use of intoxicating substances. Why isn't that included in the right action of the Noble Eightfold Path? And does it mean that if we're practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, we can leave aside abstaining from intoxicating substances? No, I think that there's a reason for this. This is my own understanding. I haven't seen this point explained in any classical text. But the basic ethical factors of right action are abstaining from destruction of life, abstaining from stealing, abstaining from sexual misconduct. Taking intoxicating substances in itself is not an immoral or unethical action. But from a practical point of view, when people take intoxicating substances, then they usually or often they get addicted to them. When they get addicted to them, then sometimes they have to steal, often lie, often kill, sometimes kill in order to maintain their habit. And then also when people take the intoxicating substances, under the influence of that intoxication, they will kill, steal, lie, indulge in sexual misconduct. And so from a practical point of view, the Buddha included abstaining from intoxicants in the 5 precepts. But the Noble Eightfold Path is intended to enumerate only those factors which are truly unwholesome and unethical in themselves, directly and explicitly. Okay, so we have right speech, right action, and right livelihood, which means abandoning a wrong mode of livelihood and earning one's living by a right livelihood. In an earlier chapter, this is the chapter on the happiness visible in this present life, we had a number of passages on right livelihood. So those of you who want to examine this more deeply can refer back to that chapter. Okay, so these 3 factors do have a common thread that binds them together. That is, they're different aspects of, we call the broad category of sila, which means moral conduct, morally wholesome conduct. Okay, these 3 factors now together form the basis for right effort. Again, we shouldn't take too literally the statement, from right livelihood, right effort arises. But rather, it's from all 3 ethical factors, right speech, right action, right livelihood. These 3 form the basis for right effort. And then the Buddha here explains right effort. The text uses a stock passage, so it's referring to a monk, but we shouldn't think that this is the exclusive practice of a monk, but it's really anybody who's cultivating the higher stages of the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, but the way this is explained depends upon a particular way of analyzing the mind, analyzing states of mind. And this involves a division of the mind, states of mind, into these two broad categories that the Buddha often uses: the unwholesome states and the wholesome states. Okay, then under each of these two categories we have a twofold division. Okay, so so we have this broad division of the mind into the unwholesome factors, and one example of this are the 5 hindrances, which we'll encounter in the next class. And the wholesome factors. And one example of this are the 4 foundations of right mindfulness. Okay, so then amongst the unwholesome factors we have those which have unarisen and those which have arisen. And each of these implies a particular task. The task for the unarisen factors is to prevent their arising. So the right effort is the effort for the non-arising of the unarisen, unwholesome qualities of mind, factors of mind. And then with regard to the arisen factors, the task is to abandon them, to eliminate them. Okay, so with the unwholesome factors, for the unarisen factors, the task is to prevent their arising. With respect to the arisen factors, the task is to abandon them. Then with regard to the wholesome factors, like the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and so on, the task is for those that are unarisen to cause them to arise. In other words, to bring about their arising. And then, with regard to the arisen factors, the task is to achieve their stabilization and their fulfillment by development. Okay, now this right effort, generally, of course it has to take place also in one's day-to-day life, but there's a particular field to which right effort is applied. And this field to which right effort is applied is the practice of right mindfulness. And so that brings us to the 7th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. And so, the way I see it, we shouldn't take too literally the statement that right mindfulness arises from right effort, but rather right effort and right mindfulness work together. Sort of, they work hand in hand. So that right effort is the application of mental energy. And then the field to which this mental energy is applied is the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So this again is explained by using a stock passage from the text. What is right mindfulness? Again, he refers to a monk, but we should understand this just in the sense that the monk is being the full-time or committed practitioner. So the monk dwells contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed longing or craving and dejection in regard to the world. Again, he dwells contemplating feelings and feelings, contemplating mind and mind, contemplating phenomena and phenomena, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed longing and dejection in regard to the world. This is called right mindfulness. This passage here forms the introduction to the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddhist discourse on the foundations of mindfulness. And later, when we get to the next chapter, the next chapter, then I've included the whole chapter on the whole Satipatthana Sutta. Then we'll explain this in detail. But here it's sufficient just to note that, first, right mindfulness you could understand to be, perhaps we could call this clear awareness, observant awareness, alert awareness, alert observation of four domains of observation. The body, then feeling here means not the emotions, but feelings in the sense of pleasant, painful, and neutral feelings. And then the mind, by what's meant by the mind here, are states of mind. Observing the mind, whether a mind associated with desire, with hatred, with delusion, or a mind free temporarily from craving, aversion, delusion. A mind, whether the mind could be narrow, the mind could be agitated, or free from narrowness and constriction, free from agitation, but directly observing, knowing one's states of mind. And then the fourth foundation of mindfulness, here it's translated phenomena, but the actual word is Dhamma, which generally, in the most general sense, it can mean phenomena, but the way this fourth foundation is explained in the Satipatthana Sutta, we see that it's particular groups of phenomena which are arranged according to fit into a particular pattern governed by the Buddha's teaching, by the Dhamma in the broad sense. And of these groups of phenomena, we have the 5 hindrances, the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense bases, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and the 4 noble truths. I'm not going to go into a more detailed explanation of the 4 foundations of mindfulness here, but the important point is that right effort is working together with right mindfulness for the purpose of focusing the mind and gaining right concentration. And then right concentration is explained by the formula for the 4 jhanas. The 4 jhanas are 4 deeper states of deep concentration. Again, we will come to the 4 jhanas in the next passage number 4 in this sutta, which we will start to discuss next week. So again, I'm not going to explain the 4 jhanas in detail now, but the important point here is that we have right effort working together with right mindfulness, initially to establish right concentration. But now this is an important point to grasp in understanding the Noble Eightfold Path, that right concentration is not the final end of the Noble Eightfold Path. But all along, with these factors that are being practiced, we have right view, samadhi, the first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. And so right view is being brought along right through to right concentration. So then once right concentration is achieved, one then uses the concentrated mind again to examine and to investigate the body and mind within the domain of the fourth foundation of mindfulness. This is the contemplating phenomena in phenomena. So when the mind is properly concentrated, then one uses that concentrated mind with mindfulness to observe the phenomena of the body and mind. And as one observes the phenomena of body and mind with the focused or concentrated mind, then this gives rise to direct insight into the true nature of bodily and mental phenomena. So at this level, right view is now becoming transformed from an intellectual or conceptual understanding into an experiential understanding. It's becoming experiential right view. It's becoming the right view of insight, the right view of insight into the nature of bodily and mental phenomena. And as this right view of insight is cultivated to deeper and deeper levels, then it reaches a new level, which you can call this the right view of realization, the right view of penetration, the right view of direct knowledge. Okay, as one cultivates at the earlier levels, the right view is understanding the nature of bodily and mental phenomena, particularly in terms of the three characteristics: impermanent, bound up with suffering, and non-self. And so this type of understanding is concerned with deepening the knowledge of the first noble truth, the noble truth of suffering. And through this type of insight, one also sees how craving and the other defilements give rise to suffering. But one doesn't yet have an experiential knowledge of the third noble truth. But as the insight into impermanence, suffering, and non-self goes deeper and deeper, then one reaches a point where one breaks through the conditioned phenomena of conditioned bodily and mental phenomena, and just momentarily one sees directly realizes the cessation of suffering, that reality which is the cessation of suffering. That is Nibbana. This we can call the breakthrough to the deathless element. And when that breakthrough takes place, then one sees clearly, precisely, directly, all four noble truths. Because now one is directly seeing, just as one could see this hand that I'm holding up in front of you, one directly sees that truth, that reality, which is the cessation of suffering. This is the unconditioned, unborn, unaging, deathless element. And by seeing that deathless element, at the same time one sees all four noble truths. And so one emerges from that experience now with This is the higher, world-transcending right view. This has now become the definite right view that will lead irreversibly to the final goal of the Buddha's teaching. It's not yet the final goal itself. This is, we call this the first stage, the initial breakthrough. But with that initial breakthrough, then one gains, I call this definite right view or definitive right view. It's the right view that can never be corrupted, can never be lost. The right view that, when it's repeatedly developed, will bring the eradication, the elimination of all ignorance and all of the defilements that depend on ignorance. We'll see this in greater detail later, but first we have to go through in more detail the basic stages of the path. Okay, at this point I'll ask whether there's any questions. Yes, please.
Can you clarify the translation of rejection in regard to the world? That doesn't surprise me.
Okay, we have here the expression, occurs in the standard Satipatthana, this is the formula, in regard to each of the four foundations of mindfulness. He dwells, having removed longing and dejection in regard to the world. The Pali is abhijja domanassa. The way I understand this is that, okay, the longing in regard to the world, this could be understood as memories, thoughts that are connected with desire, connected with craving. There could be thoughts, recollections of one's worldly experience governed by craving and desire. It could be fantasies governed by craving and desire. Projections onto the future governed by craving and desire. Okay, dejection, this is the way I understand it, that dejection is often associated with ill will, with resentment. And so this could be, okay, memories of events in the past that were upsetting, disturbing, frustrating. It could be thoughts about things that are occurring in the present that could be frustrating, disturbing, upsetting. It could be fears, apprehensions for the future about things that are disturbing, upsetting, frustrating, that bring sorrow, dejection.
Is it also within the realm of rejection, just having a spirit of dissatisfaction for not getting what you wanted, or is that too shallow?
Say again, please repeat.
I hadn't considered those, what you just said. I thought of it maybe more shallowly as just a spirit of disappointment in not getting what you wanted, or not.
It could also, certainly it can include disappointment in not getting what one wants.
In meditation.
Even especially in meditation. Yeah. So, well actually the expression loke abhijja domanassa, longing and dejection in regards to the world, it seems to suggest more, to my mind, more to thoughts about craving, or thoughts of dejection in regard to worldly experience. But also it can apply definitely to what occurs within meditative experience. If one achieves, say, some degree of progress, some superior satisfactory experiences, then almost always there arises a kind of clinging to them, especially when they fade away. then one wants to get those experiences back again. And so one sets oneself a kind of dominating project of returning to those past experiences. And then if one's development doesn't match one's expectations, or if one falls away from these higher, more blissful states, then there comes some disappointment and dejection. So that's definitely part of it. Okay, somebody got the microphone. You get it next. Satsuki. Okay.
About Noble Eightfold Path,
Yeah.
one thing that still bothers me is that you mentioned the initial right view is based on intellectual understanding, and then it widens to experiential right view. At the beginning,
Yeah.
when you have a right view, it is intellectual.
Yeah.
That bothers me a little bit. To me, if the path is the path to liberation, when you consider it as a path to liberation,
Yeah.
and especially the word Noble Eightfold Path, the key word
Yeah.
noble,
Okay.
Arya, which indicates that this path is for those of noble disciples
Yeah.
who already have experienced a certain amount of reflection and other intellectual experience in the past.
Yeah.
To me, the main vision of Noble Eightfold Path is for those of noble people.
Yeah.
Therefore, when you have a right view, you already have a certain the experience of Four Noble Truths, not as not really as a ripening kind of experience, but it's a view,
Yeah.
and then you practice from
Yeah.
there on.
Yeah.
That also explains that the Buddha didn't include the use of substance in this stage. It's not necessary. To me, it explains also. So the intellectual part.
Do you want to come up and give the lecture? I think it's good. It would be good if you compress your question or statement. Keep it in a few words.
Maybe I was just talking about my thoughts. Sorry.
Okay, no, you're making an important point. I think we actually have to distinguish what I would call two aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path. One is what is called the preliminary or preparatory Noble Eightfold Path. And this is the Noble Eightfold Path that we practice as ordinary people. In a sense, as you point out, this isn't really the Noble Eightfold Path, with that word noble underlined or put in italics. But we might call this a reflection of the Noble Eightfold Path, the shadow of the Noble Eightfold Path, a bright shadow, not a dark shadow. But, or we could call this, the preliminary Noble Eightfold Path, the preparatory Noble Eightfold Path, the good Eightfold Path, which is not yet truly noble. So that is the Eightfold Path that one practices, beginning with a conceptual understanding of the Four Noble Truths at the first stage, and then by developing right intentions, then one undertakes right action, right speech, right action, right livelihood. Okay, all of these are preparatory factors. Okay, then one undertakes right effort and right mindfulness working together till one achieves some degree of right concentration. Then with the right concentration, then one practices insight. And even when one is practicing insight, still this is part of the preliminary. preparatory Eightfold Path. Now when, through the practice of insight, one reaches what I call the direct realization, direct knowledge, the breakthrough, the penetration, that is what marks the first stage of noble attainment. The first stage of, we call this the first stage of enlightenment. And when one reaches that first stage of enlightenment, at that point one truly acquires the Noble Eightfold Path. Then one gets the right view that actually sees all Four Noble Truths. Not just conceptually, not just intellectually, but it is the right view in the sense of seeing, actually seeing the Four Noble Truths, all of them, including the third Noble Truth as the cessation of suffering. Then one, with that breakthrough, then the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path then become part of one's, call this, permanent mental equipment, in that they're always implanted within one. Just like, maybe I'll use an analogy, it's like trying to graft a branch onto a tree. So during the preliminary Eightfold Path, this is like you have the branch placed against the tree, the opening of the tree, and you have ropes around it, tying it to the tree, and you're keeping it there. That's when we're in the preliminary Eightfold Path. But when the branch that you've tied onto the tree actually starts to merge, its material starts to merge with the material of the tree, and it actually starts to become one with the tree, that's like gaining the definitive Eightfold Path, the higher, truly Noble Eightfold Path. Then those 8 factors are grafted into one's own being. They become part of one's own being. And that is what makes one a truly noble person, because one now has the 8 path factors within oneself, and then one can cultivate them whenever one applies the mind to it. It's not like one has to make a strenuous effort to cultivate them. Okay, so is that the distinction that you were aiming at? Well, I'm afraid to ask because I'll get a lecture.
When the Buddha illustrates Noble Eightfold Path in this sutta,
Yeah.
which Noble Eightfold Path is he implying? Is he talking about? Is it true Noble Eightfold Path, or is it mundane Noble Eightfold Path?
No Eightfold Path is really mundane. I say in this sutta it can be understood at both levels. Barbara had the question. Barbara is here in the front row.
What is the difference between concentrating on the mind and concentrating on the mind in the mind?
Okay.
And the body.
Okay, good. This is a good question. And I've actually come to a different understanding of it just about 2 weeks ago. There's an explanation given in the commentaries. First I'll do the traditional explanation, then I'll come to my new understanding. Okay. The traditional understanding is, we'll take being mindful of the body and the body just as an example. That means one is mindful of the body simply as a body, not imposing upon it the identification, this is my body, this is the body that I am. Not taking the body to be part of a truly existing person, the person that exists separately in its own right. And then the commentary says also to be mindful, or to be observing the body in the body, means that one isolates or separates the body from the other objects of mindfulness. When one is contemplating the body in the body, one is not mixing it up with feelings, the mind, or mental phenomena, but just focusing purely on the body. And then the same explanation would apply to the other foundations of mindfulness. Okay, that's the classical explanation. It occurred to me just a couple of weeks ago, just through some question that somebody asked me by email, Kai Anupasi Viharati. Okay. Before I give the explanation, I have to attach like a warning label onto it. This is my own personal understanding, not to be taken as authoritative, traditional, universally accepted. Okay, to get the real meaning, we have to leave the translation behind, because any translation is a little bit misleading. And go back to the original Pali. It's Kaye Kayanupasi, then Viharati, which means literally, he dwells as a body contemplator in regard to the body. And so, the way I understand it now, this is simply a rather odd Indian way of expressing the simple idea that he dwells contemplating the body. But the sort of the way that it's expressed, instead of saying that he dwells contemplating the body, but he dwells as a body contemplator in regard to the body. We could see in other passages, Pali can allow these kind of double object expressions. Like, for example, we would say idiomatically, one clings to sensual pleasures or one clings to views. But the way it's expressed in Pali, will be translated literally, he clings to a clinging to sensual pleasures. He clings to a clinging to views. But that would sound extremely odd in English. So normally we would just render this, he clings to sensual pleasures, he clings to views. So in the same way, I think we have this peculiar idiom, he dwells as a body contemplator in regard to the body. He dwells as a feeling contemplator in regard to feelings. So we don't have to read any kind of special doctrinal implications into this. But don't tell the boss. I might get fired.
Going back to right intention for a moment, right intention entails the cessation of sensual desire or desire. I'm just wondering, I don't know what kind of desire exactly is meant here. We have a desire for food, we need nutrition, there's a need, really tasty food, elaborate food, desire for beauty. And it's linked with craving, of course. I've always thought of craving as being selfish, self-centered desire, excessive desire. Could you comment on this further? I mean, what exactly is meant by desire?
Okay, this is an important question. Exactly what is meant by desire, when I said that I interpret right intention as the intention of desirelessness. But you see, actually, the word kama suggests sensual desire. So it's basically the same as sensual craving. And so what one is aspiring for or intending to what is setting as one's purpose or motivation is overcoming sensual craving. It doesn't mean the ending of all desire. The body subsists in dependence on food, so of course one has inevitably a desire to eat food. But of course it would involve eliminating the craving for especially tasty foods, delicious, well-prepared foods. And then also it doesn't mean the elimination of, say, desire for wholesome states, desire to experience beauty, say. There's actually another word which is used in Pali to signify desire in a very broad sense. This is the word chanda, not kama. Kama always signifies sensual desire.
In craving, is my interpretation correct? It's self-centered desire,
Exactly.
overwhelming desire.
Whether it's overwhelming or not, but it's always self-centered desire.
This question may be better answered after, but you have a jhana retreat coming up in November, correct?
Yeah.
A month-long retreat.
Yeah.
So I'm a little confused because I get my, when I don't meditate for a month on end, and I think of it, I'm always reminded of the story of the monk who sat for a long, long time in meditation.
Our principle here is to wait until the gong stops. Otherwise the gong gets recorded along with the question and it won't be heard. And for some reason the gong, I have to remember my own lack of mindfulness is to tell them on Saturday morning not to sound the gong so long on Saturday noon. It always seems to go on much longer on Saturday than it does during the week. Okay, now please.
My question is going to drive the point of what benefit occurs in a month-long jhana retreat. And that question is because I only sit for short periods, but I use teaching and memorization of certain things in my day, and I watch how I pass and fail throughout my interaction with work and driving, all those things in incorporation, and watching those branches, like you said, either take root or not take root, little by little, hopefully making some. And then when I think of a month-long retreat, I'm always reminded of, this is going to show my love, where how little experience I had in that kind of long-term meditation. But I'm reminded of the story of the monk who sits for a long time and wakes up angry because he sees that rats have been eating his hair. So he's delighted.
I didn't quite catch what you said. The monk who sits for a long time and what?
Right. As you can enlighten him, the moment he opens his eyes, he's also very angry and distressed because rats have eaten his hair. So what happens in the monk? That's a huge question, right? It's a ridiculous question. But what is a month-long? What is like a month-long jhana retreat?
What happens varies so much depending on each individual person. But, I mean, it's something you have to try for yourself and see. It's not all just sliding directly into deeper states of meditation, but often most of the time it's, struggling with wandering states of mind. Sometimes when one is practicing intensively, states of mind that one never realized that one could have will rise up. But what happens when one practices continuously over a long period is that one begins to build up momentum. Because when one practices on a day-to-day basis, just, maybe an hour in the morning, hour in the evening, then one doesn't get that opportunity to build up a strong momentum in one's practice. But when one is practicing continuously, one is strengthening these faculties of effort, mindfulness, well, especially effort and mindfulness. And so the effort and mindfulness are developing momentum as one goes from day to day until when they build up a certain strength, then one can go into periods of prolonged concentration, extended concentration. What inevitably happens is that the period of concentration will at times get broken, and then one has to go through other periods of distraction, disturbing thoughts coming up, working with them. And so it's a graduated process. But it's worth the experience if one has never done it before. Okay, maybe this will have to be the last question.
I have just two questions.
Oh, okay, we can take two.
And you have to say Tanya in the support. So T-A-N-H-A?
Yeah.
So is that singing or?
Tana is what is translated as what we translate as craving.
Okay, versus karma and sensual. So it's a broad category of craving you mean? Or?
Yeah, craving, the way it's explained in the text, craving includes, one of its subtypes is sensual craving.
So time is a broad.
Yeah,
broad.
yeah.
And then the other question I had, I think it was there with the Dalai Lama, talking about the path to enlightenment. He never mentioned the Eightfold Path. So I was just wondering why he never even mentioned it at all.
I think probably if the Dalai Lama is giving a talk on the Four Noble Truths, then he'll mention the Noble Eightfold Path. Which talk were you?
The one
in Pennsylvania. Because in that series of talks he was speaking about the work called the Lamrim Chenmo. This is the great treatise on the stages of the path. And I'm not sure whether the great treatise mentions the Noble Eightfold Path within its section on the Four Noble Truths or not. But I think if the Dalai Lama was speaking giving a detailed lecture on the Four Noble Truths, then he would speak about the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so we'll have to stop now. After I take lunch, I'll come back here, and then if there's anybody who has questions, then you could come, and then we can have some discussion. I'll sit on the lower level, not on the podium, so we just discuss together. Okay, so we end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so this is the dedication of the merits, sharing the merits with the Devas, these are the deities, the Nagas, the dragon spirits, the Bhutas, the fierce Dharma-protecting spirits, asking them to rejoice in these merits, to be well and happy, and then to protect the Dhamma in the world, to protect the world, to protect ourselves and others. Akasata Jabhumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumodipa Chirang Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Jabhumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumodipa Chirang Rakantu Desanam Akasata Jabhumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumodipa Chirang Rakantu Mangaram Etavata Amhehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavata Amhehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Bhutanimodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavata Amhehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Sata Anumodantu Sabba sampati siddhya Pavarupadaya Abhijihetato Etantare Satakayupapanna Rupiya Rupicha Asanya Sannino Dukha Pavuchantu Pusantu Nibutin